Welcome back to your Productivity Pulse with Michelle Oucharek-Deo. Have I got a story for you? The other day, I was just having a chat with somebody, and the memory of an incident that happened to me when I was 18 years old and almost died came into my head, and it really brought me back to the whole idea of some of the first thoughts that I started to have about time and how it related back to me and about how important time is in our lives, and I wanted to share that story with you. It was the summer of 1988, and I was 18 years old, working 2 jobs, trying to get ahead of some anticipated school debt, outrun exhaustion, and honestly, outrun time itself. I was 18. What more could you want? During the day, I worked on a grounds and maintenance crew, and at night, I worked in a fine dining restaurant at a golf and country club as a busgirl. And sometimes, if I was really lucky, I got to work in the catering department for all the local graduations and weddings in the area. I thought I needed to prove something. Maybe to the world, maybe to myself, I don't know. What I didn't realize was that I had created a life with no space in it for me to do anything but fall into bed at night, dog-tired, and generally irritated by everyone and everything. During the course of the summer, while working on the grounds crew, I was usually assigned to mowing and weeding. It was very exciting. But part of that job also meant getting rid of all the grass clippings at the end of the day. Well, it was midsummer, and our crew had run out of time to get rid of the clippings the day before, leaving us just a little narrow spot of time in the morning before we were expected at our next site. So we drove across the field early in the morning and backed up to a ravine that was going to be the repository of our previous day's work. I pulled the short stick and had to climb onto the flatbed and start pitchforking grass over the edge. Well, the next piece of the story happened so suddenly. I felt a lurch, dropped the pitchfork, and in a split second heard one of the guys yell, "She's going!" Everything in my life changed in that moment. The truck had slipped out of gear, and suddenly I was rolling backwards down a ravine, hanging onto a toolbox for my life. As the truck rolled, something strange happened. People often talk about life flashing before your eyes during a near-death experience. I used to think that was just a movie line, but it actually happened to me. What I remember most clearly was the true dichotomy that was happening inside of my brain. One part of me felt like everything was unfolding in complete slow motion, while another part knew it was happening incredibly fast. Even now, when I stop and think about it, I can still hear the truck breaking through the brush and running over the small trees. I can hear branches snapping under the force of gravity and the weight of the truck as it rolled down the ravine. And I can still feel my fingers gripping that toolbox. It was like the metal and my hands had become fused together. A part of me knew instinctively that if I let go, I was dead. And then there were the life flashing before your eyes thoughts. Now, here's the funny thing about being 18 years old and when your life flashes before your eyes. I wasn't replaying some grand life story. I was 18. Honestly, the only thing I really remember thinking was, I'm having a really not fun summer. This totally sucks. And then immediately after that, is this really the way I want to go out? Not dramatic, not poetic, just deeply honest for someone who hadn't even really started living yet. Because in that moment, time stopped feeling endless. And suddenly, every minute mattered. The truck eventually stopped about 100 feet down the ravine. It landed on its side. Somehow, it did not flip over completely. Because if it had, I would not be here telling you this story today. I remember the sound of people yelling my name from the top of the hill. I remember someone peeling my fingers off the toolbox one by one because I was gripping it so tightly and I couldn't let go. I remember my dad arriving. I remember being really quiet afterwards. Really quiet. And if you know me, you know that's something. What fascinates me now, looking back almost 40 years later, is not just that I survived. It's how surviving changed my relationship with time. Doing some research, I found, some interesting information about near-death experiences and post-traumatic growth and how it shows how people often experience major shifts in priorities, relationships, meaning, and apprehension for life after a close brush with death. One study published in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Disease found that near-death experiences were associated with significant post-traumatic growth, or at least it could be, and existential reevaluation. In simple language, people often stop seeing time the same way. Some people are deeply grateful, some become more intentional, some change careers, others reconnect with people. Some finally begin creating the life they actually want instead of the life they think they should be living. But there's another side to this conversation that we don't talk about enough. Sometimes a near-death experience doesn't free people. It freezes them. Sometimes after surviving something traumatic, people become hyper-aware of how fragile life is. They begin holding tightly to time instead of living inside it. Fear starts to quietly grow underneath everything. What if something bad happens again? What if I don't have enough time? What if I lose everything? And suddenly they stop trusting life itself. Other people sometimes go the opposite direction. They survive something impossible and begin to feel invincible. Almost untouchable, like somehow they beat the clock, like the rules no longer apply to them. That wasn't me. And sometimes that leads people into riskier choices, overworking, pushing harder, ignoring limits, believing that they can outrun exhaustion or consequence because they survived once before. But here's the thing. Neither extreme creates the peace we're looking for. One traps us in fear, the other traps us in denial. The real work is learning how to live with awareness of time without becoming consumed by it. And maybe we don't actually need to wait for a near-death experience to wake us up. Maybe we don't need the ravine. Maybe we don't need the diagnosis. And maybe we don't need the collapse, the burnout, the heartbreak, or the close call before we finally ask ourselves, is this how I want to spend my days? Because that was the real gift hidden inside that terrifying moment for me. It forced me to pause long enough to reassess. Now back to that day. During the aftermath, I actually really turned inward. Yes, I was healing from physical injuries, and thankfully those did recover with time. But the deeper healing was quieter than that. I found myself turning towards nature, towards stillness, towards creative writing. I would take my notebook to the park near my house and sit on the grass. My only intention was to write, think, and breathe. I didn't really have language yet for what had happened to me, but somehow creativity and nature gave me a place to begin processing it. I don't know, maybe that's one of the reasons I became a creative arts therapist. That's another podcast episode, that's for sure. Well, what's interesting is that I don't think I fully processed the actual event until years later. Maybe it was just simply too personal. Maybe I didn't know what to say. Or maybe it has taken almost 40 years of thinking about time, teaching about time, losing time, reclaiming time, and becoming a better keeper of my own minutes to finally understand how deeply that experience shaped me. Now looking back, it feels like a natural progression. Like this story was always meant to eventually weave its way into the work I do today. Because that moment in the ravine was one of the first times I truly understood that time is not guaranteed, and how we spend our days actually matters. After the accident, I quit my second job at the restaurant because I realized the pace I was living wasn't sustainable. I started writing again, and my family sent me away into nature for a few days to reset. And slowly, I started reconnecting with the parts of myself that had been buried underneath constant motion. That summer planted seeds in me that would eventually become parts of the foundation of my time core strategy system. Not because I suddenly became perfectly balanced, but because I finally understood something important. Time is not just something we manage. Time is something we experience. And if we're not careful, we can spend years racing through our lives without actually living them. So here's your action task for the week. I want you to create what I call a ravine reset question. Take 10 minutes, no phone, no multitasking, no scrolling, and ask yourself, if my life suddenly stopped me in my tracks today, What part of my daily life would no longer make sense to me? Then ask, what is one small change I could make this week that would move me closer to the life I actually want to be living? Not next year, not someday, this week. Because sometimes transformation doesn't begin with giant change. Sometimes it begins with one honest question. Thank you for walking with me through this story today. I look forward to more time together sharing stories, lessons, research, and practical strategies to help us use our time more intentionally, more productively, and maybe even more joyfully. Because in the end, productivity is not just about getting more done. It's about making sure our lives actually feel like they belong to us. If you want to go deeper into this conversation, I encourage you to join my community where you'll receive a special reflection guide with a series of deeper questions to contemplate about time, purpose, fear, burnout, and intentional living after life-changing moments. Sometimes the smallest pause creates the biggest shift. Grab your spark this week and do something amazing.